Hi guys, this is Jeff at Slavens Racing. This video is about Nikasil cylinder care and the tools that you may or may not need when taking care of those cylinders. Over here I've got several different tools that I'm going to explain later, and these are tools that we're not going to use except for the one on the far left. Alright, so let's start with what Nikasil is. So Nikasil is a coating that goes on the inside of the cylinder. So the outside of the cylinder, the main body of the cylinder is made out of aluminum. This is a 4-stroke one over here, a 2-stroke one over here. So the whole big casting here is aluminum, and then they bore the hole through here with a boring machine, and then they put a plating on here. It's the same process they use for chrome plating or nickel plating, like on fancy parts or bumpers or whatever. It's an electrolysis process, and electrolysis means it's got a negative and a positive charge. There's a positive anode and then a negative cathode that charge the product, the media, in this case being Nikasil, which is a silicon carbide combination. And let's talk about that for a second. So, Nikasil is patented by Moly. Moly's a company out of Germany that is very famous for its pistons. I used Moly pistons in Makos back in the 70s. They use them in Porsches. A lot of expensive German cars use Moly pistons. It's a very well-respected brand, and they invented the Nikasil product. Here in the U.S., you can get that product put on by a number of different companies. We use U.S. Chrome up in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, or Millennium Technologies, which is also in the same town. Both of them do excellent work. So if you do want replated, I'd recommend you go there. All right, so nickel. So when you, it's not impressive to see what the product is, because it's just a green liquid. When you take the nickel and silicon carbide and mix them together, you've got a really thin green liquid. And they have a whole tank full of that stuff, and they dip these cylinders down into that tank, and they charge the liquid. So you've got the negative, the negative cathode in the liquid, and then you've got a probe, an anode probe, which has got the positive charge, and that probe goes down inside the cylinder like this. And if they just clamped it onto here or something, then you would coat the whole thing. You'd have a Nikasil coating on the whole cylinder, and we don't want that. All right, so and that negative and positive charge and putting that anode down through the center here makes it adhere to the aluminum. That's a very rough description. I'm not an expert on this, on that process. I've never worked in a plating shop before. I've been in plating shops, several of them, but there's one up here in town I've been into many times. But I'm no expert on plating by any means. That's a real basic way of how it's done. All right, and then why do we use Nikasil as opposed to cast iron liner? Well, a number of reasons. Nikasil transfers heat over 5 times faster than cast iron liner does. Also, cast iron liners are very heavy, and so they don't transfer heat well. They're heavy. It's just another machining process you have to go through to install them. And then these, in modern times here, we're constantly trying to make the motorcycles lighter and lighter and lighter, okay, so they'll handle better. So getting rid of that big heavy liner is a big plus. And KTM did that back, I'm not positive when, but I think it was the mid-'80s when KTM went to Nikasil. So how do you know if you have a Nikasil coated cylinder? Well, if your bike's, mid-'80s or later, and it's a KTM, you've got a Nikasil coated cylinder. Other than that, it's a little hard to tell. I can just eyeball something and within a second know what it is, especially on a 4-stroke. There'll be a section that comes clear out into here, a real thick section all the way around. That's a different color. It's a darker color. It's cast iron. Cast iron's a lot darker than aluminum. So you can see that, and then you can see it at the opposite end as well. Plus, it's darker in here. Same way on a 2-stroke. And then on 2-strokes, the port alignment is always kind of wonky with a cast iron liner. So I know I've heard guys say that they had liners put in their 2-strokes. Well, they just detune their bike by doing that because now the ports don't flow as well because they don't match up as well. Even if you go in there with a porting tool, they just don't ever, they're never as good as they are if they're Nikasiled. All right, so that's a real basic explanation on what it is and why we use it. And it's extremely hard. The hardness of it is right below diamond. And so it's a very, very hard surface. And after they spray it in here thicker than they need it. And then first they bore the hole, obviously. Then they spray the Nikasil in here. Not spray it, but they do the electrolysis charge and put it on here a little thicker than they want it. Then they use a diamond hone to bring it up to the correct dimension, to the dimension that they want to have the correct clearance between the piston and the cylinder. And they use very high-tech, fancy hones for this. They don't use any of these. These are complete garbage compared to what they use. They use a machine that's about the size of that desk right there, maybe even a little bigger. And it's got a vertical shaft. It comes up and down like this with the hone on it, and it's computer controlled, so they can adjust the dimensions, in tiny, tiny, tiny increments to get the clearance exactly how they want it. You cannot do that with any of these things. These are very crude. All right, so why do guys, guys all the time tell me, oh, I got to hone my cylinder. Well, why? You ask them why, they don't even know why. Or they'll say, well, so my ring's a seat. Well, sorry, but that dog doesn't hunt. The cylinder on Nikasil plated cylinders does not need to be honed for the rings to seat. In the old days with the cast iron cylinder and real junky old cast iron rings, that was somewhat true. But in today's world, we're way past that. Those are bygone days, and you do not need to hone Nikasil cylinders. And if a cylinder is in such rough, and then, okay, the guy says, well, I've got some rough spots in there. I've got a little scratch here and there, whatever. I need to get those cleaned up. Well, if a cylinder is bad enough to where it needs honed, to where it's not going to damage, the cylinder wall is not going to damage the new piston and rings you're putting in, then it needs to be replated. It's just that simple. They're either good or they're not, and there's no real fixing them up if they're not so good. And how do you know if they're not so great? Well, if you've got big scuff marks in them, big, not just a light scuff, like I would call this right here. It's hard to even see in this video probably, but I would call this a light scuff. That's a very light scuff right there. And that, you could clean that up if you wanted with a little bit of Scotch-Brite and an X pattern, but it doesn't hurt anything. You can't get your fingernail on it. It's not going to do any damage to the piston or the rings. All right, so I've watched a lot of videos before I made this video because I've gotten so many heated emails and phone calls about this. Guys get really passionate about this. It's amazing. I've made every mistake in the book over the years, especially in my younger years. I've been in this business 52 years and worked for factory teams for 30. So I think my credentials speak for their own, and I'm by no means perfect. I by no means know it all. I think I'd have to live 2 or 3 more lifetimes in order to know it all about motorcycle engines, but I've got a pretty good knowledge base, and I try to pass that on to you in my videos. It's a very hard surface, and then we're putting in very hard rings. So the rings have got, they're chromoly, these days they're chromoly steel rings with the chrome coating, where chrome's very hard as well. I don't think it's as, I didn't look it up, but I don't think it's as hard as Nikasil. But anyhow, they basically don't wear into each other very well to make the rings seat. They're either going to seat or they're not on a Nikasil cylinder. So the most important part is that you have a very true cylinder. So by true, I mean that the bore is round and that it's straight this way, that it's not, like this. That's what's going to make your rings seat, is by having a true cylinder. Now, 4-strokes, with Nikasil cylinder, coated 4-stroke cylinders, stay in true pretty well, especially compared to the old cast iron. Those things would get wavy real quick on you. Guys call them tapered or whatever. I don't really agree with that. I've never agreed with that term of, oh, my cylinder's tapered. Well, no, it's not. They don't get tapered, so that would mean it's larger on one end and smaller on the other end. That is absolutely not how they ever turn out. What they do get is bigger in the middle, because the piston's going up and down, and so it's traveling across the middle way more than it is on each end, so it's going to get more wear in the middle. So they do tend to get egg-shaped. Now, 2-stroke cylinders, they get completely wonky, because look at all those holes in there. Well, each one of those holes causes the cylinder to expand and contract at different rates. And so these cylinders get out of true very quickly. You take apart a bike that has 100 hours on it, and you put a cylinder bore gauge down that, and you'll be shocked at how untrue that cylinder is. It's not round, it's not straight. But it's amazing that 2-strokes even work at all because of all those holes in there. So. But they do, and they work quite well. But when they were first developing 2-strokes, guys thought, how in the hell is that thing ever even going to run? And today, sometimes I still have those thoughts. But anyhow, 2-stroke cylinders warp. I mean, I shouldn't say warp. They get out of true quickly. And so, like I said, if you would stick like a digital dial, or a dial bore gauge in one of these, you would find out quickly how out of true your cylinder is. All right, so there's the next one of the reasons why you should never put a hone in there. All right, especially this type of a hone. This is called an adjustable flex stone hone. Well, this goes in there, and you can see. I'm just going to grab the stone over here. So these stones are going around and around as you're going in and out this way. What happens here? There you got the big exhaust port hole there. Well, it's going to try to tilt slightly. So it's going to wear the top edge off of here. Then it's going to try to chew into that other edge as it's going across. This is very unstable, and actually, if you can even hone a cylinder with one of those hones, you're doing a good job, because typically I've seen guys just blow these to pieces trying to hone a 2-stroke cylinder. I mean, they just snag in all the different ports, and of course, every time they're snagging in a port, they're taking out material. And let's get back to the material for a second. Okay, so after they're done diamond honing this at the factory or at a Nikasil replating facility, after they're done with that process, this coating's 3/1000ths or less thick. 3/1000ths is like a sheet of paper. It's very thin. All right, and then your clearances, piston and cylinder clearances, so that's the difference between the diameter of the piston and the diameter of the hole, the clearance between the two. On a brand new stock 300, it's, their spec is 2 to slightly over 3/1000ths, and they're usually in the 2 to 2.5 range. And then they consider them worn out at 4/1000ths. And so if you've got, 8/1000ths clearance with a new piston in there, you've got an extremely worn out cylinder. Anyhow, that plating is not very thick. All right, and every time you stick a hone in there, you're taking more of that plating out. So you're taking those clearances that are supposed to be very tight and making them bigger, and you're wearing out your cylinder at the same time. So tell me how that makes sense. There's lots of videos out there on honing these cylinders, Nikasil cylinders on 2 strokes and 4 strokes. There's videos by our competitors, there's videos by home tuners, there's lots of videos, but none of them explain what you're going to gain by wearing out your cylinder with a hone in there. All right, guys, so there's some of my biggest issues with why to never stick a hone inside of a 2-stroke cylinder or any kind of a Nikasil coated cylinder is because it's a very thin plating. The tolerances on these motors, actually the 4-strokes are actually even tighter tolerances. We want to maintain those tolerances for horsepower. As you get bigger tolerances, you have less horsepower, you're basically honing your cylinder, you're wearing out your motor prematurely. And you're also raising the possibility of damaging the coating at the same time. All right, just like I explained, those stones snag on all these ports and wear out the edges of the ports. Well, the edge of the port is already probably thinner than 3/1000 anyhow, because after they coated this, they had to go in with another tool. It's like a big long stone that vibrates, and they kind of go around here and put a little angle on those ports. So those edges there are even thinner. All right. Well, guys are saying, well, how about a ball hone? This is a ball hone. All right, before I go any further, let me just get into the different types of hones. All right, on the left here is a brush hone. This is the only one I recommend you ever use because all it does is clean things up. It just cleans off any kind of a scum that's on there. That's something I hear all the time is, well, I got to break the glaze. Well, what is a glaze? Where's the glaze? Show me the glaze. I've never seen a glaze on one of these Nikasil cylinders. There is no such thing. They don't glaze. Do they get scum on them? Like it's like a dark carbon, like a brownish film on them? Yeah, that's just a carbon scum. That's not a glaze. But if you want to call that a glaze, fine. All right, so that's what you would use this tool for, the brush hone. It just kind of smooths things out, brushes it, and just takes off carbon deposits, basically. It doesn't remove any material, does not increase the clearances. Next, you have a ball hone. This is really popular. And guys always want to buy one of these and stick it in there and start wailing away. All right, on this kind of on a 4-stroke cylinder, it's pretty easy to use a ball hone, although you never should. On a 2-stroke, if you don't know what you're doing, you got to go through there back and forth really fast, or it will tear all the balls off of here. Well, what do you think it's doing? Every one of those, because the hone is not the exact same size as this cylinder bore. So those balls are pushing into each one of these ports and taking material off the edge of the ports. They're also bouncing around. So the balls, rather than just spinning, they're doing this around there. They're jiggling up and down as they go around, and they're making the surface worse. They're making it an uneven surface. All right, now some guy I'm sure is going to pipe in and say, well, so the rings can wear in. The rings do not wear in on these new motors. Rings, yeah, over a lot of hours they would, but not like the typical break-in period like you're thinking. Okay, this is called a flex stone hone. It's going to adjust you here to where you can put more pressure on the spring, which puts more pressure on the stones. These come in different abrasive levels, anywhere from really fine to really coarse and everywhere in between. And these will definitely snag in the ports and break the stones and do damage to the ports at the same time. This is called an adjustable rigid hone. I bought these 2 hones off of Amazon just for this video. I'm going to package them back up and send them back because I'll never use them. So I didn't put this together, but basically these stones go in here in these slots, and then you can turn this adjuster and make them expand and contract to fit the hole. And then this piece goes in the end, attaches into there, and hooks onto a drill bit, electric drill. All right, so I've seen guys use these on 2-stroke cylinders too, and 4 strokes, but this is what we used back in the day when we were boring cylinders with the boring machine at the motorcycle shops. And this is how we honed them to get the clearance. Well, little did we know we were doing a pretty crappy job. We thought we were doing a great job at the time, but we weren't. And so the problem with this thing is it's kind of a behemoth, and it won't snag on the ports like that other stone home will. But unless you've got a method like a jig to hold your drill exactly in the center line of that bore as it's going in and out, some type of a sliding jig or something, well then guess what it's going to do? It's going to be going like this. It's going to get cockeyed on each end. You know, I'm exaggerating how much it's going to get cockeyed here, but it's going to move a little bit on each end, and then it's going to take more material off of your cylinder on the end. Also, because these 2-stroke cylinders get out of true, what it does is it just takes the highlights off. So any place that's, there's going to be high points and low points, it's just going to knock those high points off and take the plating completely off of those areas to where you're down to aluminum. All right, guys, so we've already discussed all the reasons why I think you should never stick a hone inside of a Nikasil plated cylinder. So let's move on to something else that we get calls on all the time about cylinders, and that is, a guy's out racing on a Saturday or Sunday. He gets home late Sunday night. Next day, goes to work, and then that Monday night he gets home, washes his bike, and he noticed that his bike was just kind of losing power at the end of the race on Sunday, and so he thinks he needs to get into that top end and see what's going on. And he pulls it apart and discovers that he's got some issues in there. All right, so at that race, maybe it was a mud race, the bike was running hotter than hell all day. Maybe he didn't have a fan kit. Maybe his fueling or jetting was too lean, whatever the case is, or a hose came loose and lost some water. There's a number of scenarios, but anyhow, he noticed that his bike got slower as the day went on, and so he tears the motor down and finds out there's some issues in there. He's got a mild seizure. All right, so at that point, he's got some aluminum stuck onto the Nikasil coating. So the piston transferred aluminum onto here when everything was so hot, and now he needs to get that off of there because he's got another race coming up the following weekend, or he's got a big ride coming up with a bunch of guys, and he just doesn't have time to maybe do it the right way, and that would be to replate the cylinder. He's chasing points, or whatever his scenario is, he's in a panic mode. He wants to get his bike back together as soon as possible. All right, so at that point, what you can do is you take some muriatic acid. You can go to a hardware store, Ace Hardware, one of those places, and you got to buy a gallon of it, unfortunately, and buy some muriatic acid and get some Q-tips, preferably some longer ones. And then you just take a little bit of that muriatic acid and you pour it into the cup of the jug, just a little bit of it, and then you dip that Q-tip in there and you just rub it back and forth on the affected area. It's usually, a patch, like this, but sometimes it can be huge. If it is, you might be totally screwed. I mean, if the whole thing is got aluminum on it, then you might just have to cancel your next event. But anyhow, so if you have some smaller areas that need some attention, well then you would just take that muriatic acid solution on the end of a Q-tip and put it on that aluminum. The muriatic acid does not hurt the Nikasil whatsoever. And when you put it on the aluminum, it will start bubbling. So just let it bubble away and just kind of rub, keep rubbing back and forth on it until you get all that off of there. And then at that point, you've got some damaged Nikasil. Your Nikasil coating is pretty nerfed up. So and that's when the guy thinks, oh, I got to get out that hone. Here we go with the hone again. He wants to borrow his buddy's hone and just hone away and fix it. Well, do not do that. Go back and get yourself some 220, 240 grit emery cloth and some Scotch-Brite and work on it in an X pattern. So this way and then the other way. So this way and then back this way and then kind of an X pattern until you get that to where it feels smooth and it's not going to damage the new piston and rings that you're going to have to put in there. Because at that point, hopefully you've called Slavens Racing and they've blasted out some parts to you quickly. We ship everything same day that we get the order, providing it's before 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Colorado Mountain Time. So anyhow, and we've got plenty of top-end parts in stock for all the different models. But regardless, so now you've got your new parts, and you're actually going to sacrifice those parts. You're not going to be able to reuse them later to replate the cylinder. Say you've got some break where you could do that. Now, you're going to have to buy another piston, a second new piston later on. But if you're just in a bind, you're in that panic mode, you got to get this thing ready for that next ride or race or whatever it is. That's how you would do it. And just work on those by hand, get them nice and smooth, but do not hone it, because at honing, you're just going to make the cylinder bigger. You're going to make your clearances bigger, you're going to make your bike slower. Don't do that. All right, so how do I take care of my cylinders? So when about every, we'll say around 100 hours, I pull the top end off, throw piston and rings in there, and I service the power valves. That's a separate video, power valves. And so what I do is first I inspect it to see if there's any areas of concern. If there's maybe a little hot spot or something, I might take a little 220 emery to that, or a little Scotch-Brite. I would start with the Scotch-Brite first. Typically my cylinders don't have any damage to them, but every once in a while there can be just a little issue of some sort. And I'll just address those real carefully. Well, at that point, the emery cloth or the Scotch-Brite both are an abrasive, so this material is very porous. The nickel silicon carbide combination is very porous. It doesn't look like it. That doesn't look porous at all, but it is. So you're pushing those little particles of grit into the porosity, and you need to get those cleaned out. Now, at the different facilities where they work on cylinders, they've got what I call hot tanks. They're chemical bath tanks, and they can dip them, and they'll usually have several different tanks that they dip them in to get them really clean. But we don't have that option, so we've got to do it by hand. So you can wash them in hot soapy water. If your wife's out of town or gone for the evening, maybe you could slip it into the kitchen sink and with some good hot soapy dish water, just use dish detergent and a scrub brush and get in there and scrub on it. And then as soon as you get it out, blow it off. Blow it out with some compressed air. You want to get all that water out of there quickly. So just get a nice, a clean rag, something like this, and wipe in there. Just keep wiping the whole cylinder bore until you don't get any dirt on the rag. You can see this is picking some up. And just keep doing that over and over until you no longer get anything on the rag. Then you're good to go. All right, so that's basically all I do. I sometimes will use a brush hone, one of these, but I usually don't even do that. I usually just do it by hand. I just get in there with a little Scotch-Brite if necessary. Usually it's not. And then the rag with some WD-40 on it and clean, clean, clean. At that point, it's ready to go back on the bike. And of course you'd want to get a Slavens easy top-end kit that has the easy clips in it. If you've never used those, you should, because the stock ones are a real booger to get in. You will be cussing and they might shoot across the room or hit you in the head or whatever. So get our easy clips, guys. We've got the best price on the whole planet for those. Oops guys, I almost forgot something that everybody asks about, and that's how do I break in my new top end rebuild? Well, there's nothing to break in. At the bottom end of the motors was broken in a long time ago, the bearings, the rod bearings, the main bearings, and the bore was broken in a long time ago when you first got the bike. So, the rings seat by themselves. I mean, there is no break-in procedure for rings. Actually, the harder you ride a bike, the better the rings will seat. So just ride it. There's nothing to break in on a top-end rebuild because you don't have new tolerances. Now, if you went out and had it plated, well, yeah, you might want to take it a little easy on it. But if it's just you're sticking a new piston and rings into an old hole, there's nothing to break in, guys. Just ride it. Just to review, don't ever stick a hone in one of these. All you're doing is making your clearances bigger. You're damaging the coating. You would also be getting that grit into the porous Nikasil coating, and that's hard to get out. And just keep it simple. If it's not a good-looking bore, then it needs to be replated. If it's got a lip on the top, so if you can, they'll form right where this carbon is right here. Let's see. So this ring of carbon, right where that is, just right below it there, if you can feel a lip there, so if you can feel a lip with your fingernail, that means your cylinder's got a lot of wear. You don't need to bother using a bore gauge and measuring it. It's worn out. So at that point, it needs to be replated at the two places I mentioned before, US Chrome or Millennium Technologies, or another one of your choice. There's other ones around the country. And that's really about it. So it's either good or it's not. If it's looking bad, then it needs replated. And you should always buy your piston kit and stuff before you send it off to be replated, and then just send the piston with the cylinder, not the rings, just the piston with the cylinder, and then because they need that to size the hole perfectly, because there can be a little bit of variance between pistons. You could pull 10 of them off the shelf and there'd be a little variance in there. All right guys, I hope this helps you make a decision about how you want to rebuild your top end on your bike, and hope to see you out on the trails. Please like us on Instagram and Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, get out and ride. It's time for more throttle therapy in 2024. That's all for now.